Namaskarams to all. You know, the subject that has been given to me is spiritual democracy, a path away from tolerance to acceptance. Is that right? It's a very interesting subject and very abstract. Abstractness is the virtue of saints. It is not a virtue of the ordinary. You know, we are living in Kali Yuga. In Kali Yuga, virtue doesn't play a great role in shaping either humans or the society, unless virtue is presented as a necessity. Even for day-to-day life, social life, economic life, political life, virtue should not be elevated to the level of being worshipped. What we are trying to do is virtue is worshipped. No, virtue is necessity. Unless you are going to present virtue as a necessity, spiritualism as a necessity, as an economic necessity, because I am an economic thinker, I will try and present it as an economic virtue. For example, Gurumurthy spoke very interestingly with facts and figures about family life. And Sadhviji spoke about the necessity for spiritualization of life, whether it is science, whether it is sociology, whether it is economics or politics. We understand all that. This country is designed for that. This country is born for that. This country is actually the only hope for the world. But the challenges that we face is that our own education system, our own media, our discourse is teaching our people, evangelizing our people into believing that this is not the way to grow. This is not the way to growth. You know, this is because this was the mandate that was given by the United Nations in 1951, that you have to discard your philosophy, your way of life, your relationships, if you want to develop. That is what has shaped the world and is attempting to shape India. So it is in this context we have to see how the way we are presenting our spiritual and virtuous way of life as something which is an ideal is not actually the way to present, in my view, because my association with spiritual leaders gave me the way to understand how the ordinary society works. The ordinary society in India, I use the word ordinary in a very normal sense. Don't think I mean it in any inferior way, because we always compare ordinary with extraordinary. When I say ordinary, it is a person like me. Take it that way. So, the ordinary Indian is extremely spiritual. He may not know Bhagavad Gita, he may not know Isavasya Upanishad, but he is connected to people in whom he has faith. Hundreds and thousands of holy men who have been born in this country have transformed this into a virtuous society, and I am going to demonstrate it to you as to how this virtuous society, bred in intense spiritualism, which these great texts speak about which the ordinary Indian doesn't know, and how he has the ordinary Indian, the woman, the father, the grandfather, everybody, the neighbor, have shaped this society into a stable society like a which nowhere any society exists in the world. This is how I would try to present my concrete thoughts. You see, unless you present an abstract thought as a concrete value, the abstractness will remain a virtue and an ideal which we cannot attain. So I will try to present this as a concrete phenomenon. Now, there are several elements in this: spiritual, democracy, tolerance, acceptance. From tolerance to acceptance, is an evolution which the world needs. Swami Vivekananda mentioned this in his Chicago speech, that tolerance is an inferior virtue. We have adopted and followed and propagated a higher virtue called acceptance. We may not think what you are doing or what you are thinking or what you are worshipping is not the right thing, but you have the right to do it. But for you it is sacred is our way of looking at the world. That is, we accept what we do not even accept. Second thing is, tolerance is in danger because of intolerance. Because the world functions at a tolerant level. The world doesn't know the idea of acceptance, which means you have to see the world as diverse. Not only humans, the entire creation is diverse. But the world is not trained, not educated. The public discourse has not helped the world to understand the word diversity. You may be stunned to know the United Nations first heard and wrote about diversity only in 2001. Till then, the word diversity did not enter the United Nations. It is only in the Cultural Diversity Convention in 2001 that the United Nations first understood the world is diverse. So you can understand how the world was moving till 2001. Even while saying so, they said cultural diversity is so important, the whole human development will have to take place on that basis. But if there is a conflict between culture and human rights will prevail over culture. Human rights is an individual right. Culture is a collective virtue. If individual rights prevail over a collective virtue, there can be no family. There can be no community. There can be no neighborhood. You know, if I see my progress from being a young boy in a village to what I am today, you know how many people have contributed. My own neighbor has slapped me and corrected me. My teacher has slapped me and corrected me. My mother has abused me and corrected me. Is this the way we are allowing the society to function today? Is this the ecosystem today? And we are interfering at each level. Whether it is education, whether it is neighborhood, whether it is the family, children's rights, parents' rights, women's rights. We are faced with a huge problem. If you talk against this, you are intolerant. If you talk for this, you are backward. You are taking the country, you are taking the world hundreds of years back. This is the public discourse which I have faced throughout my entire understanding of what public life means. I would like to share all this with you in a short time, because this in 35 minutes is a long time here, but for the subject, it's a very short time. Now, look at democracy. Democracy means liberal democracy today. This is the contemporary definition of democracy. And you are talking about spiritual democracy. So spiritual democracy means acceptance of everything. And liberal democracy means toleration. So there is a difference between spiritual and liberal democracy, in that spiritual democracy is acceptance of everything, and liberal democracy means tolerating the other opinion. Second thing is, spiritual democracy rests on duties, or what we call as dharma. There is mutuality of duties. But liberal democracy rests on rights. Many people may not be aware that when H.G. Wells wrote that famous document, the Declaration of Human Rights, he sent copies of it to different people and sent a copy to Mahatma Gandhi also. Many people do not know what Mahatma Gandhi replied. He said, H.G. Wells wanted Mahatma Gandhi to endorse the concept of human rights. Mahatma Gandhi said, I will endorse it provided you change the title from human rights to human duties. This is what people who saw far ahead of their times would say. Everybody was arrested by the time in which they were caught. Because fascism, Nazism, communism, everything suppressing the people, and you have to revolt against it. And the only way to revolt against it is creating the individual as an institution. That's how the world, which was caught in this great ideological conflict which took place in the 19th century, 20th century. So they all caught hold of individual right, human right, as the basis on which the human society would develop. And another thing, the most important thing, I will come to the point with Guru Rank Das ji raised, that spiritual democracy rests on relationship. Liberal democracy rests on contracts. A relation-based society cannot be transformed into and should not be transformed into a contract-based society. And liberal democracy stands for a contract-based society. And another important thing, in spiritual democracy, there is reverence as the founding principle. In liberal democracy, the lack of reverence is written in enlarged manner. Paul Woodruff, one of the persons who studied the modern society in the context of the current education system, he said modernity lacks reverence. Modernity, he said, in the sense of West-driven modernity, it lacks reverence. So you can understand the democracy that we are talking about as spiritual democracy and the democracy that we are practicing as liberal democracy are two different paradigms. Do we understand it? Can we speak about it? Political parties cannot. The media will not. Intellectuals will never. Unless you are going to create a very powerful, independent, competent, intellectually sound, selfless people committed to the idea that the world is going towards ruin. And it has to be U-turned unless you create that cadre of people. And you will have to take on intolerance in a big way. Many people do not know one of the most liberal thinkers in the world was Karl Popper, whose open society is the Bible for all the liberal people. He wrote in 1945 that the biggest problem of tolerance is intolerance. If intolerance becomes so powerful as to destroy tolerance itself, then the tolerance which tolerates the intolerance has no meaning. But today, the liberal world calls upon you to tolerate and be suicidal in your approach, and still nobody quotes Karl Popper. Karl Popper said this is the paradox of tolerance. The idea of paradox of tolerance has to be revived in the public discourse, which has been lost in 1945, which has been completely destroyed in the public discourse, democratic discourse. This has to be brought back. All this is good. Whatever Sadhvi said is true. Whatever Guru Rank Das ji said is true. All is fine. But is there any living model of all this? Is there any sustainable living model of all this which can be presented to the world? First, to make us convinced that we are having a functioning model which we can speak about, which we will feel confident about, which we will adumbrate, which we will tell the world, and we will evangelize the world. Of course, not in the sense in which evangelization takes place today, but in the sense in which we want to turn the world to the view that our great forefathers, our saints and seers have given. And that is the way we have to reduce the abstract into the concrete, which I will try to do. There are 4 principles on which I will rest my speech. 1, the obvious thing is the most difficult thing to detect. It is called Newtonian apple principles. Apples were falling, everybody was seeing, but Newton only asked, why is it falling? Why is it not going up? The entire paradigm of science shifted. Because we think what is functioning as given. And we have to get into the Newtonian apple apparent principles to find out how our society has been functioning and will function in future. The second thing is we have to take an integrated view. We are saying environment is one, and politics is another, economics is another, science is another, and everything is specialized. And one of my friends told me that his wife had an eye problem and he went to a eye hospital. He said there are 8 eye specialists, sir. All of them have to examine her to find out what is the problem. You can understand how specialization has debased our life, destabilized the society, and created employment opportunities out of the instability of the society. And this is, of course, in a way, development. But the fact remains that this over-specialization has not given us the helicopter view. Unless you have a helicopter view, integrating the different silos, you will not be able to get at the truth which the Newtonian apple principles will reveal to you. The third point is that we have to move out of the current context. You have to decontextualize ourselves. The world is now moving in a direction in which the greatest people who conceived the world order, like Henry Kissinger or George Soros, who has been funding billions and billions to sustain this liberal order, both of them have said the world order is collapsing. It has to be saved. If the Western civilization has to be saved, the world order has to be saved. Do we understand what this world order is? It is shifting and shifting and shifting. And the Knowledge Foresight Institution of the European Union has said by 2030, there will be no hegemonic power in the world. The power will be so diffused and shared. All the people who have some kind of power will assert themselves, and there is nothing like a world order functioning at the command of one thought, one institution, or one set of powers, economic or political or military. Because military power is also getting diffused. So we have to move out of the context, because we are all part of the global order, and we are afraid of speaking against it, because if somebody speaks against liberal world order today, he will be called as a Neanderthal human being. So we have got to summon the courage to examine the current world order, for which there was an incident in the life of Maharishi Aurobindo. Maharishi Aurobindo had come back to Pondicherry, came to Pondicherry. The entire revolutionary movement had collapsed. 1907, 8, 9 to 1919 was probably the blackest period in Indian history of freedom. The rebel movement had been crushed. Mahatma Gandhi hadn't come. Congress was merely petitioning to the British, please give us this, please give us this. In this period, everybody was looking to great people like Maharishi Aurobindo and Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Of course, Tilak passed away in 1919. When people approached Maharishi Aurobindo, you must tell us, because he is the person foreign educated, come back with enormous amount of reputation. And he said, I am looking at this man, a mystic called Kullachami. And he was a mystic. He was a madman. He was throwing stones. He will laugh. He will shout. Aurobindo looking for guidance from him? He said, yes, I am looking for guidance from him. One day Kullachami came. He lifted the teacup in front of Aurobindo, showed the teacup. It was full. Then he emptied the teacup and showed it to him. And then placed the teacup and went away. Aurobindo said, I have got my message. His friend said, you lost your tea. Please tell us what message you got. Aurobindo said, he has asked me to empty my mind and think afresh. We have to do this. And I am going to show to you why we have to do this. All these are very abstract principles. I have to reduce it to something concrete. And I will tell you how we are missing the most obvious Newtonian falling apple principles. And I will take the universal facts as well as the facts relating to Bharat. Let us take very simple facts, which are admitted facts. No one can question it. In the whole world, 29% is all the surface land that is available to human beings. Out of which 20.3%, 20.6% is the habitable land. Out of which 10.3% is the agricultural land. In that 10.3%, 75% is used for meat farming. And 25%, less than 25% is used for crop farming. You understand this? In the natural resources which God has given, 10.3% is all the surface that is available for us to grow food. Out of which 75%, more than 75% actually, is used for meat production, and less than only 2.4% of the total land area is used for crop production. Now I will go into even more critical facts. Out of the calorie value of food that we get, 83% is from crops. Only 17% is from meat, for which we are devoting 75% of the farmland. And from 25% of the farmland, even less, we are getting 83% of the calorie value. Now you go to protein. 63% of the protein value comes from crops, and only 37% comes from meat. You know, in the Paris Climate Convention, climate meet in 2015, many people joined together to say that we must have at least 1 week, 1 day meat-free day. The meat lobby won't allow it. Stopped it. Your entire liberal discourse said everybody has the right to food. They can eat whatever they want. Who are you to stop? Now I will tell you what is the consequence of it. Let's assume. Now I will come to Bharat and then go to this. So, cereals give you 16 times the calorie value and 5 times the protein value as compared to. Keep it in mind so that when we go forward, you will understand where we stand in this. In India, we have only 2.4% of the global land area, total. And we have 18% of world's population. And we have 30% of world's cattle population. And we have 8% of world's birds and mammals. And we have 21% forest coverage. People are stunned. How does this happen? It happens because of this. It is because we use that agricultural land. 1% of the world's 10% agricultural land is with us. We use it entirely for crop farming. And our meat consumption is just 3.1 kg per head per annum. Whereas the meat consumption in America is 124 kilos per head per annum. It's more in other countries. In South Africa, it is 180. And because of this difference, we are able to manage with 1% of the 10% agricultural land the world has. And we are able to feed the 18% human population. And what about our animals? We feed them also. And world's 30% cattle population is in India. And if you take all four-legged population, bovine population is 30%. All the cattle population you take 535 million. We feed them. When we did not have food, the cattle population also was going up along with human population. We never ate them. You know, when we talk about our spiritual democracy, it is not limited to human rights. It is extending to animal rights also. Animals will never get their rights unless the human beings feel the duty towards them. It is our duty to protect animals that has made a part of our social, cultural, spiritual, national being. Nobody is an exception to this. Even the meat eater has great self-restraint in India. He will not eat on this day. He will not eat on Amavasya or Ekadashi or Friday or Saturday. Everybody has some holy day also. So there is no meat consumer in India. We only take meat as subjis. You know, do you mean to say all this has happened by accident? Shoemaker raised a great question in his Small is Beautiful. The world is arranged in a certain way. Everything moves in a certain way. Everything seems to be functioning in a certain order. is that there are two ways of looking at it. This is all mindless evolution. Or you think there is a mind and a philosophy behind it. There is a philosophy behind it. And that philosophy is lived in this country. Unless you are going to think about it that way, we will not be able to get at what means spiritualism lived in actual life. Unless you are going to present it as spiritualism lived in actual life, it is livable. And simple, I will tell you, if the entire world takes to the American way of eating food, we will need 40% more agricultural land than the world has. If the entire world takes to Indian way of eating, we will need only 40% of the agricultural land the world uses today. If you want the data on all this, internationally accepted, irrefutable data, you will find in our world in data.com. You can go and look at it. These are all openly available. These are all Newtonian falling apple facts. Do we look at it? We are so illiterate. The open facts which teach us not what the life is today, how the life has been conceptualized by our great saints and teachers and our texts, practiced by ordinary people who know nothing about these texts. This is institutionalization of spiritual life that has taken place in this country. And it is not just that. Two more examples that comes very near to what both of them said. One is that in India, there are about 26 crore families. And in America, there are about 13 crore families. They say in America, there was a time when 3 persons were living in a household. 3.1 in 1950. Now it is 2.5. This 0.6 per house reduction has forced the Americans to build 35 million more houses at 8.5 trillion cost, and no one can measure the environment cost in terms of steel, in terms of cement, in terms of electricity, in terms of 100 other things that goes with the running a house. In India, we have 4.9 persons living per household. And from 1950 to 2021, this figure has come down from 5.1 to 4.9. It's a national average. In spite of all the liberal ideas and in fact that everybody has the individual right to do whatever they wanted to do, the Indian families have withstood, not because of your laws, not because of your courts, not because of your media, not because of your public discourse. Everything is against it. It is because of the retailed idea of spiritual way of living, sharing. That is in our DNA. And I will give you the example. If in India, this 4.9 per head, per family, comes down to 2.5 as it is in America, we will need 135 million more houses. There is no space not to leave the money aside. There is no space. Do we understand it? That's why we accommodate grandparents, even extended families, widowed sister, the handicapped brother or sister or son. In fact, one of my friends, he took German tourists for a visit. He was an enlightened man, he was a professor. He chose to become a tourist guide to tell the tourists coming from outside India what India is. He took them to the mental asylum in Kiel Park in Chennai. The Germans asked, how many patients are there, how many beds are there? 250 beds and only 200 occupiers. And how much is the population of Tamil Nadu? How many beds you have? He said, we have about 500 total beds for mentally affected people. And our population is 40 million. It was at that time. 40 million and only 400 beds. In our country, we will be needing 400,000 beds. To which the professor replied, a mentally deranged brother or father or the mother or the son or the daughter is still a father, a mother, a son, a daughter. He said, we are spending billions of dollars to create this feeling. We are spending hundreds of thousands of rupees to destroy that feeling in India through human rights. Do we understand it? We celebrate a demon. Do we have the guts to speak about it? Then spiritual democracy will come. The society is willing to do what you are afraid of talking. The society doesn't practice human rights. No father disowns a son. No son disowns a father. In fact, I have addressed the IIT Bombay. My student is here. He was a professor. He also attended my lecture for 4 years. In IIT Bombay, I taught the IIT management school. In all management schools, I used to speak. And when I asked them, in IIT Chennai management school, I asked them how many people, you students, are educated by your parents by spending their money. The entire audience lifted its hand. But in America, if you ask this question, are your parents spending you for higher education, out of 300, not even 10 or 15 will lift their hand. They have to borrow. They have to get scholarship. This is how the relationship binds. And now come to the next step. You keep your parents, you keep your grandparents in the same house. That's a problem. There is invasion of your so-called individual rights, but there is pleasure in it. That is what makes India a different country, Indian economy different, Indian savings model different, and women are at the center of this happening. If Indian women give up their Indian womanhood, there will be no India. There will be no spiritualism. You can run any amount of matas. Do we understand it? Do we credit them with that? Does our public discourse recognize it? Does our education system recognize they are trying to de-humanize the Indian woman? Now I will go to the most important thing. You know, in America, there is universal social security system. That is, children need not take care of their parents. They have to pay some 12.5% tax, social security tax, and the parents will be taken care of. Milton Friedman onwards, many American economists warned the American government in 1980, don't do this. Don't interfere between the intergenerational duties and obligations. This will become a demon. You know what happened today? Today, the American government got more money because more children were born. So more people were contributing to the social security. Till 2009, it was hunky-dory. More money was coming into the social security system and less money was being drawn. In 2006, it reversed because the baby booming stopped. So the births became less and so the contributors became less. People were over-living till 80, 90. They were drawing money. From 2006 onwards, the social security system turned into negative. Now the calculation is that if the future social security burden is reduced to the present day value, $72 trillion is the deficit in the social security account. This is a dynamite under the American economy. But in India, this entire thing is taken care of by the family. In fact, I asked many economists from America and other places, which is the biggest public burden? They said this has to be privatized, this has to be privatized, this has to be privatized. They used to tell me. I said, what is to be privatized? Can you privatize the social security system in America? You cannot. Because you cannot create families by law. Do we understand that the virtues of a family has an impact on the economy? Unless you teach the people, unless you educate the people, unless the public discourse changes, liberal democracy will destroy the spiritual democracy. In spiritual democracy, It is not limited to human beings, like liberal democracy. It extends to the entire creation. Everything has a right to live because of your duty to protect it. It's a very vast subject. It requires a paradigm shift, and we need to be open about it, and we have to become unpopular to speak this. How many people can become unpopular to speak the truth will finally lead us to the conclusion whether we can win the game. We are in a war, a psychological war, an intellectual war, a geopolitical war, an economic war, a sociological war. We can win the war only and only if we speak the truth and say any liberalism that destroys the family, the community, the social cohesiveness, the social order is destructive of the human society. This is how I would like to put my views. Thank you very much.